Now, the government announced this week that it's going to increase the number of trainee doctors by 25%. But will it be enough to solve the problems here in the East Midlands, where a shortage of GPs is combining with tight budgets to create a double headache for patients? The news comes as doctors in one part of the region are warning they may have to stop carrying out some routine procedures if they don't get paid for them. Here's Helen McCulloch.
The doctors of the future. But are there enough of them? For many of these students, getting a place at the University of Leicester's medical school is an achievement in itself.
I applied when I was 18, but I didn't get in. So then I applied after my degree. Again, I didn't get in. So then I applied the next year and then I finally got in. So it's been like a long haul, but then I got there in the end, so it's like yes.
I didn't get in first time and I had to take a gap year. But in the end, it worked out a lot better for me because I was able to gain a lot more experience.
The government announced this week it would be boosting the number of places at medical schools by 25% in a bid to become self-sufficient, ending the reliance of hiring doctors from abroad.
Whilst we do definitely welcome it, it's going to take about 10 years from now before the new medical students are working as independent practitioners. We have to realise that we're spending a much lower proportion of our national income on our health service than happens in most countries.
Jeremy Hunt's announcement that there'll be more British-trained doctors has been welcomed, though there are some concerns over the costs. GPs in Lincolnshire have already warned they may have to stop some procedures unless they get more funding from NHS bosses.
Well, we currently perform routine ECGs, ear care, 24-hour blood pressure monitoring, all things which have traditionally been done at hospital and which hospitals are still funded to perform, and general practice is not funded to perform those services. Whilst we're finding it difficult to provide safe care to our patients for the things we have to do, we will have to stop at some point doing those things which we don't have to do.
Lincolnshire GPs are now in talks with their clinical commissioning group to get paid for the services that they carry out for free. And there is sympathy from the CCGs, who recognise that money is tight.
We are still having so much cuts, but there are no huge increases in the NHS budget to be able to allow for the increased demand on services. And pressure on general practice and all of the NHS is very tight. Some practices are really struggling with the amount of resource they're being allocated to look after the patients, in keeping with the increasing demand of the patients and difficulty recruiting.
With a shortage of GPs and a shortage of cash, it's more pressure on our doctors and their patients.
So this works out at around 1,500 new places at medical schools from about 2018, and that is for the whole country, Mark, and not all of those students, as we know, will end up staying in the NHS or being doctors.
Well, we're going from 6,000 to about 7,500 per year. And actually there is an obligation on those extra students to stay within the NHS for a period of time after they finish their training. I think this is a really good news story that we're clearly committing to the NHS for the long term, and you have to recognise that the NHS's greatest asset is its staff and its people, and I think this is a really good news story coming from the government.
Well, we heard there, didn't we, the Dean of the Med School at Leicester University saying that it takes around 10 years for students to become independent practitioners. That's an awful long time to wait when we need them now.
Yeah, and of course there are those pressures within the NHS at the moment, something the government recognises, but I think if we can give the opportunity to more very bright people coming through the education system to aspire to be doctors and work within the NHS, that has to be a good thing. And I think extending or getting rid of that restriction on the number of places that we've seen in the past is a good idea.
John Ashworth, what do you think? The government is trying to tackle the problem, wouldn't you say?
Well, I'm glad they recognise it's a problem. I mean, the last general election in 2015, we in the Labour Party said we needed more doctors in our NHS, and one of our big commitments was for more doctors. Of course, David Cameron at the time said it wasn't doable and all the rest of it. So I'm pleased to see that the Conservatives are taking up one of our ideas. But as we saw in the package, we really need these new doctors in our NHS quickly. I mean, so far the government have been cutting student nurses' bursaries, they've been cutting the budgets for NHS. We've got another £22 billion worth of cuts to come to the NHS. And at the Tory conference this week, they're saying to sort of doctors from the EU who are saving British lives, oh, pack your bags in a couple of years' time. So, you know, great that they're now getting on with it, but I wish they'd got on with it sooner.
That simply isn't true. I mean, actually, at the last general election, the Conservative Party said to the NHS, how much cash do you need? The NHS said we needed £8 billion extra. We're going to deliver £10 billion by the end of this Parliament. We were the only political party to commit that extra cash, and we were only able to do that because of the efficient running of the economy. And I think, you know, it's all right to talk about what you would do and how you would do it, but unless you run the economy properly, you haven't got the cash to deliver to the NHS, which, you know, both of our constituents desperately want to succeed.
As Shadow Health Secretary, as you now are, this is going to be a priority for you,
well, it's going to be
it?
a big issue, you know, and I think there's a lot for the Labour Party campaigning on the NHS. I mean, I think the NHS is on the brink of crisis. We've got so many trusts in deficit, we've got people leaving the NHS, we've got waiting times going up, and you know, Jeremy Corbyn on Friday offered me the role of Shadow Health Secretary. I agreed with him that it's a big campaigning job of work for the Labour Party, so I've taken that up, and you know, I'll be you know, exploiting some of these issues that you know, which the Tories are, you know, making mistakes on over the next few weeks.
Well, looking at the issues that we have been in our programme, Lincolnshire GPs saying that hospitals are funded for those services they have to do for free. Maybe we need to be using our resources better, differently. What do you think?
Well, you know, of course, if there's better ways to use resources, we should always look at that. But the government have said the NHS have got to find £22 billion worth of efficiencies, and there's a lot of people thinking that they can't do that simply from savings on paper clips. It's going to come down to cutting services, and that's a big challenge for the NHS and a big challenge for the Tory government to over the next few weeks and months.
Actually, it's not just about cash. This is about the way in which the health service interacts with adult social care. And we've got to get that balance right to make sure those people who find themselves in a position where they're stuck in a hospital bed have got an ability to move into adult social care, because it saves the taxpayer money. It's better for the patient.
Everyone agrees with that. But Eric Pickles cut the social care budgets that local councils had to spend. So, you know, you talk about social care, it's been decimated.
But, you know, looking ahead, we're talking about getting new doctors and more places on medical school courses too. But right now, we've got this problem, and it's a mess, isn't it? Look at those GPs in Lincolnshire saying that they're going to have to cut certain services. Of course. Monitoring of blood pressure. It's really important stuff. Of
course there's pressure. There's always pressure in the NHS, and we need to make sure we're funding that properly, which is what the government is doing. I mean, locally, actually, we've seen the recruitment of extra nurses within the Nottingham Healthcare Trust. So there is progress being made.
But it comes to something, doesn't it, when GPs say they're going to have to cut some services completely because there isn't the funding there?
Well, I think particularly in the East Midlands, we do find ourselves struggling to recruit GPs, and I think locally we need to look at how we encourage GPs to come to the East Midlands. There is pressure within the East Midlands, but I think you know, the only way you can support the NHS is by running the economy properly and making sure you've got that cash available to fund it, which is what the government's been doing and committing to do for the long term.
I mean, Mark's absolutely right on that. See, I'm not always partisan. I mean, in Leicester we've had an issue trying to persuade GPs to come to Leicester, and one of the things the City Council did recently was come to Leicester because we've got a Premier League Championship football in Leicester, so
you've got to seize the day, haven't you?
You've got to use every lever at our disposal. We've got to pull.
But it is a real problem in Leicester too, as well.
Yeah, it's a problem in Leicester.
You know, attracting doctors to the East Midlands is particularly a problem, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we've got to work on that, definitely.
And it's not something you can blame the government on entirely, is it? You know, the problems in the NHS are caused by our growing elderly population as well, aren't they?
Well, I can blame the government about the cuts to social care, but the specific issue about trying to recruit people in the East Midlands, I think that is something that all of us in politics and public service interested in these issues can work together on.
OK, thank you very much.